بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Today we will start by talking about المعاني الناقضة للوضوء أي the nullifiers of wudu. والمعاني الناقضة للوضوء. So the nullifiers of wudu are number one كل ما خرج من السبيلين, all that exists from the two passages. So from the two passages which provide as an exit for all of the processed food and the waste material inside a person's body. So anything which comes out of those two paths, whether it's standard, I mean, whether the path was built for that, or whether something that normally doesn't come out of them, for example, blood, or maybe a tapeworm or something like that. So anything which exits the two paths is going to nullify the wudu. So for example, if someone had an endoscopy or a colposcopy or a cystoscopy or any of those things in which the doctor examines the inside of the organs through either of those two passages, then after that pipe or that wire comes out of your body, that's going to nullify the wudu. Except for one thing, except for the air that passes through the front passageway, that doesn't nullify the wudu. That bubble feeling that a person might get. So that doesn't nullify the wudu, because the air that comes out of your back, because it passes over the feces, that's why it's najas. But the air that's coming from the front, because that doesn't pass over any najas material, anything impure, so that air which comes from the front is not considered as being najas. Except for if a woman has a medical condition called the rectovaginal fistula. In this condition, what happens is that part of the rectum, the wall of the rectum becomes thin or it actually ruptures. And so that and the vaginal passageway, they become one. So contents of the rectum might enter the vaginal passageway. In this case, because there is a chance that the air that passes through actually went over, is coming from the rectum, which, as we mentioned, does nullify the wudu. But because we're not 100% sure, so in this case is mustahab that a person makes wudu, but it's not necessary that they do. So that was number one, كل ما خرج من السبيلين, everything that exits the two passages. والدم والقي والسديد إذا خرج من البدن وتجاوز إلى موضع يلحقه حكم التطهير. And blood, pus, and serum, such that they exit the body and flow to a place that is subject to the rule of purification in general. So you can understand that obviously beneath your skin, there's blood flowing, there might be serum, and in some cases, if the blood cells are dead, they may collect up to form pus, right? So these things exist beneath your skin, so they're already present. So when the skin is removed, they only resurface or they appear, right? They haven't actually exited the body. But once they move from the place of origin to any part of your body, which is supposed to be washed either in wudu or in ghusl, when you're bathing or you're just performing the wudu, then this is considered as the exit of an impure material from your body, which then nullifies your wudu. But as long as you just scrape your skin and the blood only appears without flowing, then this does not nullify your wudu. And that's the reason if you take a piece of cotton and wipe it off before it flows, then again it won't nullify your wudu. Unless you do it again and again in such a manner that if you were to leave that blood in its place, it would have started flowing. In that case, it is going to nullify your wudu. But if it's such a minute amount that doesn't flow on its own, it doesn't touch any of the skin that is with it, then there's nothing that stops you from praying with that same wudu. You don't have to make a new one. Now, this is important to know the words which he says, that it flows to a place that is subject to the rule of purification. So that's basically your entire body. If any part of your body, you're outside, starts bleeding, then you have to make wudu. But if it's inside, if it's an internal bleeding, then obviously that doesn't nullify wudu. Similarly, if blood actually comes to the inner part of your eyes, as long as it's within the eyeballs, because that part is not washed neither in wuzu nor ghusl, it's not going to nullify your purification. So subject to purification, white, whether it's in the form of wuzu or it's in the form of ghusl. Similarly, let's say you had a wound and you applied bandages to it. Now, obviously, when you put a bandage on it, it is going to have blood on it. That doesn't is considered if the blood actually comes to the other side of the bandage. It was so much that it actually penetrated. Then in this case, because this is a lot of blood, this is going to nullify a person's wuzu. Also, similarly, if, for example, a tick, they suck a person's blood, or a leech, for example, because if it's huge in size, then this will be considered as blood flowing from your body, which will nullify your wuzu. But if it's a mosquito or if it's really small tick, usually the amount that they take from a person's body is very low. It's not considered as having a flow to it, so that won't nullify your wuzu. And because we know that flowing of the blood, that is the nullifier here. In the case that you go for blood donations, that will nullify your wuzu. But sometimes before you donate your blood, they might take a sample of it to check whether or not your hemoglobin level is okay. In some cases, the blood might flow, and in that case, you'll have to redo the wudu. In some cases, it actually doesn't really flow. It's really a small cut. And if that happens, then your wudu will remain intact. So that was the second. Basically, pus and serum in the bloods, then when they actually turn it into a water burst, a pimple, it would like ooze out of it, just like water. And so that too can have confusions about it. وَالْقَيْءُ إِذَا كَانَ بِالْأَلْفَمِ. And the third nullifier is vomit, which is a mouthful. Now remember, a person might actually have a vomit of the food. It might be bile. It possibly could be blood or film. So these are 5 things which might come out of a person's body through their mouth. Now, as far as the first 3 things are concerned, that is water, food, and blood, right? Now, if it's a mouthful, it is going to nullify a person's wudu. But if it's less than a mouthful, then it doesn't nullify the wudu. But remember, as far as blood is concerned, uh, the mouthful is only a condition if it's in solid form. Like if their blood crystals are coming out of your mouth. In that case, if it's a mouthful, then you'll have to redo your wuzu. But if it's actually in its normal state, in a liquid state, then in that case, it doesn't have to be a mouthful. Even a little bit, if it comes out, is going to nullify a person's wuzu. Except in the case when you're brushing your teeth. Sometimes the gums start to bleed. If you spit that out, that won't nullify your wuzu because that amount is actually very low. But that's only the case in which the saliva doesn't change color. If the saliva actually changes color, I mean, you can see your teeth bleed, and when you spit out, it's like normal transparent liquid. Your wuzu is intact. But if it starts turning red or a shade of brown, that means that the blood was actually in high quantity, which will nullify a person's wuzu. Anyhow, so if it's food that's coming out, or if it's water or blood, then a mouthful will nullify and less than it won't. But if it's film, then even if it's a mouthful, it's not going to nullify a person's wuzu. And as far as bile is concerned, so whether it's less or whether it's a lot, in both cases, it will nullify a person's wuzu. So you have 3 categories in one in which qaleel or the lesser amount, less than a mouthful, does not nullify and a mouthful nullifies. Then you have a kind of thing that comes out of the body, which even if it's a mouthful, will not nullify. And then you have one thing that even if it's less than a mouthful, in each case, it will nullify your wuzu. The first category, its members are food, water, and blood. The second is film, and the third is bile. So these are the type of vomits that can happen to a person, and the ahkam relate to them. Now there's one question. What if a person in one go doesn't actually vomit a mouthful, but successive vomits in short amounts, which actually come up to a mouthful? Will this nullify a person's wuzu or not? There are two opinions within the Hanafi method. One says that one majlis or one gathering, so the minute amounts of vomit or the successive vomiting that happen within one gathering will be considered as like one, that all of it is connected. So let's say if a person, they barf up 3 times, like in one gathering, in one sitting, but if you gather that all, it would have been a mouthful. And by mouthful, we mean that it's impossible to close your mouth. I mean, your mouth gets so filled up that it starts seeping out of your mouth, even if you clenched it tight, you closed it tightly. So that's what mouthful actually refers to. Now, if they successfully did it 3 times in one gathering, if it were collected, it would have been a mouthful. Then this is going to nullify person's wuzu. So that's one opinion, that the gathering, all the things that happen in one gathering, is considered to be the same. The other opinion is it depends on the sabab or the cause behind this vomit. So let's say you were walking and you saw a dead rat with its belly torn open and its insides on the road beside you. So let's say that's something that caused the nausea and you started vomiting. So you barked a little, then you went home. You actually remembered that image in your head, and then you barked again. This could happen in 5 minutes, maybe it happened like an hour later, or maybe you remembered it 2 days later and then you actually barfed. So if that amount, because the same cause, that same image of that dead rat that came to your mouth, mind, and that caused the vomit, if you collect all of it and it reaches a mouthful, then it's going to nullify your wuzu. The safest thing to do is to consider both of these causes. Either it was one gathering or it was a single cause which resulted in those successive or multiple vomit sessions. So a person should do wudu in both cases, but normally when you go to the Dar Ifta to ask for a fatwa, they'll tell you that the majlis or that gathering opinion is more valid, in the sense that if in one majlis you do it successively for multiple times and results in a mouthful, then it is going to nullify your wudu. But if in one majlis it doesn't happen such, then your wuzu remains intact. So that was number 3, vomiting a mouthful. And number 4, النوم مستجن أو متكئا أو مستندا إلى شيء لو أزيل لسقط عنه. That sleeping when a person is lying down, reclining, or leaning on something in such a manner that if that support was removed, the thing on which they were leaning on, then they'd actually fall. So in any of these cases, the wudu becomes nullified. Not that sleeping itself is an impurity or an act of impurity, but what happens is when a person is sleeping, their joints and their muscles, they loosen up, they relax. And once your body is relaxed, your muscles are relaxed, the possibility of something exiting the passageways, the chances of that becomes high. Especially if you're sleeping, you won't know if maybe even air exited your body. And so because of that, because of the high chances that something impure might exit your body, and obviously when you're sleeping, you can't really know what's happening, we'll consider sleeping to be the indicator that something just might have exited your body. And so that's why sleeping results in your wuzu becoming nullified. Not because in itself is an impurity, but because high chances of an impurity exiting your body follows you when you sleep. But this only happens when you're lying down or you're reclining on your side or you're leaning against something. If you're actually sitting on the floor with your butt against a hard surface, your muscles are pulled up, so they're not that relaxed. Your body is still in, like, it's similar to that in a waking condition in which you have control over your muscles. So sitting in this rough position in which you're not taking support of anything, you still have control over those muscles. They're actually contracted. So in this case, the possibility of something najis exiting your body significantly decreases. And so that's why if you're sitting on a chair or on the floor without taking any support, this won't nullify your wuzu, right? Similarly, if you're traveling in a car or a train or even the airplane, and you're sitting in your chair, but you don't recline to the back of the chair, you're not taking support of the back of the chair, actually maybe in upright position, or you've placed your head on the seat in front of you. This also won't nullify your wuzu because again, you don't have that relaxed position in which the muscles loosen up and the chances of impurity actually increase. And this is actually a very important usul or principle to remember, that there are some things that we can't observe, right? And sometimes when a thing is unobservable, but it's an actual cause for something else. Like in our example, khurujun najasa, or the exiting of an impurity, that's the actual cause of the wuzu being nullified, right? But when you're sleeping, you can't know whether something exited your body or not. It's possible the amount was so low or so less that normally it would be unobservable, right? But now when you're sleeping, you can't even feel that happening. So although the actual cause was the khuruj najasa, the exiting of the impurity, but because in the state of sleeping it's unobservable, so we substitute this actual cause with something that indicates this cause or can replace this cause. And in our example, that is sleeping, right? So the actual cause is substituted by one of its indicators or one of its alamats for the hukum or for the ruling that is supposed to happen. And you'll see this principle being applied in many other cases as well. One of them is going to come in Kitab al-Taharah again, and then you'll see them in Kitab al-Salah and other places as well. So it's important to remember this, that sometimes an actual cause for a hukum is substituted or replaced by one of the indicators of that cause. And so this was number 4, sleeping. وَالْغَلَبَةُ عَلَى الْعَقْلِ بِالْإِغْمَاءِ وَالْجُنُونِ. The fifth is the intellect being overcome by fainting or insanity. So you have irma, which is basically fainting, and you have junoon, which is insanity or madness. Similar to irma and junoon is a sakar, which is intoxication. So all these three things, they are going to nullify a person's wuzu. Again, not because that fainting or insanity themselves are najas, they're impure, but for the fact, just like in sleeping, person who's unconscious or a person who's insane, they don't have full control over the muscles of their body. So it's a loose state, a relaxed state in which the possibility of something najas exiting their body without them knowing is possible. And so again, that's why this unobservable factor is substituted for something that is observable, one of its indicators. And this goes for intoxication as well. And even though it's possible in intoxication that a person might have full control over their body, possible. But once a hukum is decided for something, it applies in all cases. Because how is it possible for you to judge whether or not they do have, right? Like drinking alcohol is something intoxicating, and actually being intoxicating are two different things. So if someone drinks alcohol, that won't nullify the wudu, but becoming intoxicated, that does. Now, obviously, intoxication is on a spectrum. What is the minimum limit through which we say that the person has lost control over themselves? Uh, when they start spouting out nonsense, when they start blabbering. First salama. Second is that their mishya or their walking style, that drastically changes. And third, when they can no longer distinguish between man and woman. This will be considered the kind of intoxication which doesn't allow a person, or this is considered the intoxication through which wuzu becomes nullified. And number 6 is وَالْقَهْقَهَةُ فِي كُلِّ صَلَاةٍ ذَاتَ رُكُوعٍ وَسُجُودٍ. Laughter in every prayer that consists of bowing, ruku, and prostration, sujood. Also known as as-salah mutlaq. So any salat mutlaq in which there is sujood and in which there is ruku, laughing nullifies your wuzu. So if someone had the audacity to laugh in a funeral prayer, then their wuzu will remain intact because funeral prayers don't have ruku and sujood. Similarly, if you're doing sajdatul tilawa, the sajda a person does after reciting one of the verses in the Quran, in which you have to make sajda after them. Because this is not a salah, this is not a prayer, if someone laughs in that sajda, it will nullify their wuzu. Now, there are three words. There is at-tabassum, az-zihk, wal-qahqaha. Now, tabassum is just smiling. Smiling neither nullifies your wuzu nor does it nullify your salah. Then there's zihk. Zihk means a kind of laugh which a person themselves can hear, but their neighbors, people beside them, they can't hear. This kind of laugh, uh, it nullifies a person's salah. So if you're praying and you laugh like you can hear yourself, then it nullifies a person's salah, but it doesn't nullify their wuzu. But if someone laughs so hard that even people beside them can hear them, then this nullifies the wuzu and the salah. And again, not that because laughter is an impurity, and neither that laughter actually makes the exiting of impurity possibility, but simply because it's mentioned in the hadith that the Prophet Islam was leading the Sahaba in prayer. A blind man was passing by and he accidentally fell into a trench. So some of the Sahaba, uh, they started laughing out loud. So the Prophet Islam, after finishing the prayer, he said that whoever of you laughed should repeat their wuzu and their salah. Simply because we have this hadith, we say that laughter nullifies the wuzu, even though in its actual state, laughter is not something that nullifies a person's wuzu. So that's why outside of salah, if someone laughs all day long, this is not going to have any adverse effects on their purification. So within a salah, which consists of bowing and prostration, laughing out loud breaks a person's salah and the wuzu. And laughing just so a person can hear themselves without anyone else nullifies the salah but not the wuzu. So you should also know the difference between. And it doesn't matter whether you purposely laughed or you just mistakenly laughed. It doesn't matter whether you did your wuzu or you did your tayammum. In both cases, it is going to result in the wuzu becoming nullified. And so these were the 6 things that nullify a person's wuzu. In other books, they mention other things as well, which constitute as wuzu nullifiers. But in reality, these 6 are the principles, and every other thing is actually based on them. You'll either have some kind of impurity exiting your body, it need or it might be related to something that results in the loosening of your muscles, which increases the possibility of some impurity exiting your body. So every other is based on these 2 principles: the exit of an impurity or the high chances of the exit of an impurity. So remembering these 6 should suffice in those situations as well. You can probably make a qiyas or a guess in which, for example, you'd think that your wuzu becomes nullified. And this, we come to the end of the nullifiers of wuzu. Now let's talk about ghusl, the major ritual purification. But before we talk about its components, uh, know that al-ghuslu ala ahadi ashara wajhan, that there are like 11 kinds of ghusl, 11 kinds of bath. 4 of them are farz, they're obligatory. 4 of them are sunnah. 2 of them are wajib, they're compulsory. And then you have the category of mustahab, and there are a lot of components or a lot of uh, variables in a mustahab. So as far as the 4 farz ghusl are concerned, the first is when a person has sexual intercourse. Ghusl after sex is farz. Ejaculation is not a condition in that. The second is al-ghusl bil-inzal. So if a person, man or woman, they ejaculate, whether it was due to ihtilam, they had wet dreams, due to thinking about someone or something, kissing, touching, whatever. It doesn't have to be the whole package. Anything which leads to ejaculation nullifies the wuzu and necessitates al-ghusl. This is the second kind. The third is after her monthly periods are over, then ghusl becomes farz. And the fourth is after her postnatal bleeding stops, then the ghusl becomes farz. The 4 sunnah ghusl are of the Friday of both the Eid when before a person wears the ihram, either for Umrah or for Hajj. And the fourth is for those people performing Hajj the day before Arafah, the 9th of Zul Hijjah, before the Wuquf of Arafah, making Ghusl is Sunnah. As far as the two wajib ghusl are concerned, first is the washing of the dead, I mean, before the burial, washing the deceased person, giving them a bath, that's wajib. The second is not kind of a ghusl, it's basically washing. If a person has impurity on their clothes, we'll talk about the details of impurities later on, but only if you have the amount of impurity which does not allow you to pray salah, either on your body or on your clothes, and washing that part of the body and washing those clothes becomes wajib. Then you have al-ghusl mustahab, the preferred ghusl. And these are a lot of kinds. For example, when a non-Muslim accepts Islam, for them ghusl is mustahab. Similarly, for example, if a child, boy or girl, they reach puberty not through normal signs, but actually because they become of age without having feel any of those signs of puberty which normally happen, then that's mustahab. Similarly, for example, if a majnoon, if an insane person, uh, they actually regain their sanity, or if an unconscious person, they actually regain consciousness, then in this case, ghusl also becomes mustahab. So these were the 11 places where a person performs ghusl, divide between being farz, wajib, sunnah, and mustahab. Now let's talk about the farz of ghusl. So a major ritual purity of bathing. What are the necessary components? So first of all, al-mazmazatu, rinsing a person's mouth. And if you're not fasting, then you should gargle as well. So that's farz number one. Farz number two is al-istinshaq, which is rinsing the nose. And if you're not fasting, then you should pull the water up to the hard part of your nose, the burning sensation that you get when you dive into a pool or when the water reaches the hard part of the nose. That should happen. When fasting, you avoid both of these things, gargling and pulling water up to the hard part, because the possibility of it entering your throat is high, and which will actually nullify your fast, and you don't want that. So you don't do that in fasting. But when you're not fasting, you should gargle and pull it up to the hard part of the nose. And number three is ghaslu sa'il badan, to wash the entire body head to toe in such a manner that no part of your skin remains dry. And you have to make sure that the water touches every part of your hair as well. Now, if you have open hair, then each strand of hair should also be washed. But if you have braided hair, like usually done by African women, that really tight braid that they have, which takes hours to do, like literally hours to do. In this case, you can suffice by just making sure that water reaches the roots of your hair. You don't have to wash every strand of hair because there's a lot of haraj in that. There's a lot of difficulty, extreme difficulty, in actually opening your braid, each strand of it, then washing it, and then rebraiding it again. So in order to avoid this haraj, in order to avoid this difficult situation, the Sharia allows a braided woman to actually just wash her hair and make sure that the roots of the hair, the hair follicles, they become wet. But if you don't have those kind of braids, then in that case, you're going to have to make sure that every strand of your hair becomes wet as well when washing your body. Now, the things that we discussed in wuzu about having nothing on your body which makes a layer over it, preventing water from reaching it, about prosthetics, about wigs, about hair transplants, makeup, and all of those things, they apply over here as well. So you shouldn't be having a layer that covers your skin. If the wig or prosthetics are removable, then they must be removed in order to make sure the rest of your body becomes washed. If you have like an injury, you can't remove your bandage, then you can just wipe over it. You don't have to force yourself in pain just to wash it. Same applies for makeup if you've been baking, etc., etc. So hopefully you remember all those different actions. Now let's talk about the sunnah of ghusl. In short, everything which is sunnah in wuzu is sunnah in ghusl. Except for facing the qibla, for example. In when you're doing wuzu, facing the qibla is like mustahab, but when you're doing ghusl, you should not be facing the qibla. So if the qibla is either in your north or south, then you should stand in an east-west position. If it's east-west, then you should stand in a north-south position so that your prior parts don't directly come in the line of qibla. That is to be avoided. So the sunnah of ghusl, أن يبدأ المغتسل بغسل يديه وفرجه ويزيل النجاسة إن كانت على بدنه. That a person performing ghusl should commence by washing both his hands and his or her genitalia. If there's any physical impurity, then they should remove it. ثم يتوضأ وضوءه للصلاة. Then they should perform the wuzu that they do for salah, the normal wuzu. إلا رجليه, except for washing their feet. Now over here he mentions that you perform the entire wuzu except washing your feet. But remember, they didn't have a proper drainage system at that time. So whenever they bathed, water used to collect at their feet. And now it's possible that the water might become najis. So if it's at your feet will become najis, and then washing it will be like a waste of time because you have to wash them again. So that's why in these old classic book, it's mentioned that when taking a shower, a person does wuzu except for washing their feet because in their times the feet would become najis again. So they mentioned that once you've completed your ghusl, you go to another place, then wash your feet. But since we have proper drainage systems, we will complete the entire wuzu at that very moment, like including washing the feet. So after you're done making the wuzu, يفيض الماء على رأسه وعلى سائر بدنه ثلاثا. Then they pour water over their head and their entire body 3 times. So you first pour it over your head, then on the right shoulder, and then on the left shoulder. So make sure that tayammum starting from the right side is being met. ثم يتنحى عن ذلك المكان فيغتسل رجليه. Then he moves away from that place and washes his or her feet. But I mentioned this was in the case when water used to collect at a person's feet. Nowadays, it's not necessary. وليس على المرأة أن تنفض ضفائرها في الغسل إذا بلغ الماء أسفل الشعر. This is something that I already mentioned. That's not necessary on women to undo their plaits, their braids, when they're taking a shower, if water can reach the roots of their hair. So as long as it's reaching the roots of your hair, then it should not be a problem whatsoever. والمعاني الموجبة للغسل, the things that make ghusl obligatory. إنزال المني على وجه الدفق والشهوة من الرجل والمرأة. Number one is the ejaculatory discharge of semen, uh, either from man or a woman, but this should be with passion and with dafaq, with like, let's say, a spasm. Because sometimes when a person lifts very heavy weights, or if you're extremely tired, you may have a seminal discharge. But because it's not because of passion or because of like simply because not because of passion, this kind of inzal or this kind of Semitic discharge does not necessitate ghusl. It must be done because of shahwa, it must be done because of passion. Or maybe not because of passion, but if a person is sleeping. So if it's a wet dream, even though it may be passionless, even so, ghusl becomes wajib. والتقاء الختنين من غير إنزال. The second is the meeting of both external genitals in sexual intercourse without ejaculation. So when having sex, I mean, ejaculating is not a condition. Ghusl becomes necessary even though there is nothing happening. And this again is the same principle is being applied over here, that once his genitalia is hidden in hers, the possibility of something might have been discharged exists, but because it's unobservable at that time, so the hiding of his genitalia in hers is considered as an indicator or an alama of ejaculation or a discharge happening. And so that's why ghusl becomes necessary, or in other case, your purification actually becomes nullified. والحيض والنفاس, and menstruation and postnatal bleeding, when they stop, ghusl becomes wajib. وسن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم الغسل للجمعة والعيدين والإحرام وعرفة. And the Prophet Islam, he said ghusl as sunnah for 5 prayers, the 2 Eid prayers, ihram, whether Hajj or Umrah, and when staying at the Arafah. And we've already mentioned these 4. وليس في المذي والودي غسل وفيهما الوضوء. There's no ghusl in the case of madhi, which is the pre-seminal liquid. It's a white, transparent, sticky kind of liquid which can exit. And similarly, wadi, which is the post-urinal fluid. This is a more thick, white kind of fluid, which sometimes exits a person's urinal passage after they're done urinating. So in both these cases, uh, there's no obligation of ghusl, there's only wuzu, because they're in the same hukum as urine. And so that's why ghusl is not necessary. You can suffice with only doing wuzu in these 2 cases. Now our next discussion revolves around uh, water and its types. It's a bit of a lengthy topic. Possibly won't be able to complete it today. So I'm going to stop here.